guys. So our internet went down. And so I am now on my laptop. So I apologize about that. My big old computer in my office just totally disconnected from the internet, and I can't get it back up. So I'm not quite sure what was happening there. So I apologize to all of you, but it looks like most people are getting back on. So, phew, whatever that means, we needed a pause. Okay, great. Most people are getting back on. And luckily I've got slides on this one too. So let me get back in and pull up where we were. It's very interesting because when I've taught on trauma before, in fact, I specifically taught on trauma in a class I was teaching on the highly sensitive person. And I got Zoom bombed. Like I had someone enter the room and put all these profanities in the chat box. So it's really interesting. Here I am again today talking about trauma, and my computer my internet goes away. So I don't know what it was, but I'm glad you all joined me again. So let's dive in. It might not have good as quality here on my laptop, but I think it's going to work. All right, so I think this is where I was, and this idea that trauma is super common, we've all experienced. And so there are several different types of trauma. The first one is developmental. And this is trauma that happened. It can even happen when we're in utero, meaning that if our mother was going through some extreme stress during the time of our while we were, in the womb, that can definitely impact us and our own personal nervous system. I always ask my clients if they know anything about their mother's pregnancy and or their particular birth, because sometimes, of course, birth can be quite traumatic for people. Also, those first couple years of life, our capacity or a mother's capacity to attach to us can have a huge impact in terms of if we develop post-traumatic stress disorder, if we've been in some kind of traumatic event. So we know those early years are really key. And the challenge with it is that we don't remember our early years. We don't remember when we were in utero. We don't remember our birth. And so sometimes it can be a real puzzle for us to understand. I feel like I have all these symptoms of trauma, but I don't remember things. A lot of times it can be these early developmental times. I had a client once that I worked with who had a history of really needing to physically protect himself. So he had taken karate and he was a black belt, and he was always carrying knives, or he had weapons just as a way, and he didn't really fully understand it. And as we started to kind of unearth and go back and figure things out, we realized that he had a really hard initial upbringing. And when he started to realize that he had a really unstable root, right? He didn't have early attachment with his mother. It kind of came together for him, realizing oh, if I can get steady and stable in myself and develop that strong root, then I don't need to carry these weapons with me. And that's exactly what started to happen. He started to really work with his root. He really started to create safety in himself, and he started selling all of his weapons and his guns. So we know early things, developmental things are, impactful in how the rest of our lives unfold. Now, there can also be a certain event. So this might be like the car accident or being assaulted. So there can be a specific event. And then last but not least, there can be collective trauma. And collective trauma, I think we've all been through collective trauma in this last few years with the pandemic. And collective trauma, the way it manifests is very interesting in that it happens to a group of people, and then sometimes the effects of it don't show up for a period of time, or the effects of that trauma, that collective trauma, show up in the next generation. And so, Nazi Germany is a great example of that. In fact, I lived in Berlin, Germany in the mid 90s, and would talk with sometimes people about how the current generation hadn't been in the war, and yet they were still sort of living out the trauma of it because of their parents and their grandparents living through it. So these are the different types of trauma that can impact us. And the thing about trauma is, again, 70% of people, this is from the science, have at least had one potentially traumatic event. And these are the big traumas. This isn't sort of, I'm talking about trauma in a very generalized way today, but we know 70% of people have had some kind of trauma that either could lead to their death or a possible death, right? So an intense trauma, 70%. But the interesting part is not everybody who experiences the trauma develops PTSD. It's only about 20%. So again, researchers are trying to figure out what is it that makes certain people prone to develop a disorder that can last for a lifetime versus other people go through a similar trauma and seem to be okay. We also know women have a much higher potential. They're 4 times as likely to go through trauma than men. So there's a well-known study called the ACE study. And this comes from the late 90s. Kaiser Permanente, the big healthcare firm, mostly out on the West Coast, California in particular, they did a big study. So they got a big number of people and they asked them these questions, did you have any of these things happen to you as a child? And interestingly enough, only a third of this population had had no adverse experiences. So the majority of children or majority of people have had some kind of adverse childhood experience. 1 out of 10 people have had emotional abuse. 1 out of 4 people have had physical abuse growing up. 1 out of 4 women have had sexual abuse. 1 out of 6 men have had sexual abuse. And then there's all kinds of studies that have come out of this data set. Some of the studies that I find really fascinating is people who have a lot of childhood events, a lot of trauma as a child, end up having a lot more physical health problems as an adult. So they end up showing more autoimmune problems, more asthma. So we know, again, these early periods of time are super key. Okay. So people often ask me, or, I hear people come and, or, people say, well, I've got really complex trauma. So I want to define this because the DSM-4, which is sort of the diagnostic manual for psychologists, psychiatrists, does not have complex PTSD or complex trauma in it, although the ICD-9-10 does. But these are sort of the main differences, is that PTSD is usually a single traumatic event, where complex PTSD or complex trauma is long-lasting trauma. So it might be more subtle, such as a parent being emotionally abusive, and it goes on for a much longer period of time. So, I bring this forward because, again, I sometimes feel like the people that I'm working with are dealing more with long-term effects of complex trauma, kind of continuous trauma or continuous abuse or continuous neglect that happened early on versus just a particular single event. And oftentimes it's the complex trauma, specifically when the trauma has come from caregivers or people who are supposed to love us. That trauma is often far more challenging to unravel than an actual event. Complex trauma really breaks down our capacity to trust people and to let people in. And as we're going to talk in a moment, that's one of the key factors in healing from trauma is connection and being with other people. And so I just wanted to sort of make this definition because some of you that are listening today are going to sort of acknowledge that, yeah, I think that there was a lot of early sort of experiences that may have led to some of my experiences now as adult or my challenges in relationships as adult. So Let me get out of here for a moment and look at all of you. I also want to make sure that my battery charge is going to not run out. And I'm going to spotlight like that. Okay. So I started graduate school in the late 90s. And what I learned as a graduate student and early in my practice as a psychologist working with trauma was we were still sort of using cognitive behavioral therapy as a way to treat trauma, which means we would want people to talk about it. Like, let's go through the trauma. Let's understand it. Let's think about it in a different way. How do you feel about it? So it really wasn't until I would say around 2000, and I'm going to talk about why this was, that we started to acknowledge that, you know, if we're going to work with trauma, we have to work with more than just the headspace. We have to like actually bring in the body, because trauma is actually stored in the tissues of the body, not just our brains, not just our mind. And this is sort of the seminal book that changed my thinking on it. And I know many people's thinking. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a fabulous book. It's pretty dense, but I do recommend this to people. The Body Keeps the Score. And he was really, he's been a pioneer in the field of trauma and really is helping people understand how the mind and the body are very connected and how we have to get into the body if we're going to work with trauma. So the theories that Dr. van der Kolk has based much of his work on, again, came about in those late 90s, right? As the time that I was this green psychologist thinking I could just talk about trauma with people instead of really start to pull things down into the body. So in I think it was 1994, there was a theory that started to come out by someone named Stephen Porges, and this is called Polyvagal Theory. And I won't go into the ins and outs of all of this, but it deals with this beautiful 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. I think this is such a gorgeous artistic depiction of it. It starts right at this sort of brainstem, and you can see it. It sort of moves through the lungs and the respiratory system. And then where most of the innervation of the vagus nerve is down in the gut. So our gut reaction, our gut response, the function of our gut is really impacts the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is called the queen of our parasympathetic nervous system, which means she is the one that helps us when we're overwhelmed and stressed. She helps us return to rest and digest. She helps calm us down. So we want a strong vagal tone is what they call it. And Stephen Porges came up with this beautiful theory. And this is, again, when I was in graduate school, we just thought it was fight, flight, right? And now it's really expanded to help us understand that when we're stressed out, when we're overwhelmed, the first thing we try to do is the green part of this big image you're looking at right now. We try to socially engage first. So if I'm overwhelmed and stressed, I want to reach out to someone and say, I'm overwhelmed and stressed. I want someone to hug me. I want someone to look me in the eyes. I want someone to say, Betsy, it's going to be okay, right? So we first try to socially engage. But if that social engagement isn't available for us or doesn't work, then we do sort of flip into that fight flight state. But what polyvagal theory teaches us is that we're social beings. And our first course of action when overwhelmed is to try to socially engage first and foremost. So polyvagal theory says that we want a strong vagal nerve, right? We really want this strong capacity for our body when we're super stressed out to be able to return. So we don't stay stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. We're able to return to a more restful state. And polyvagal theory has figured out that one of the ways we can know if our vagus nerve, our vagal nerve is strong, is something called heart rate variability. And so Stephen Porges, his theory was about 94. Heart rate variability began to sort of take interest in about 1999. And what we found out about heart rate variability is just simply the measurement of the time between each of our heart rates. And if you're anything like me, you've got a little bit of high need for organization. I like the top one the best. I think that one looks good, right? Like My heartbeat is at 1 second between each beats, right? That one looks really good to me, but that's not the one we want. We want the one below it, which is a little bit more random, right? It's not like clockwork, right? So, you know, an irregular heartbeat, ironically, is a healthy heartbeat. So for us to have high heart rate variability, which means we can flip back into rest and digest quite quickly, we need an irregular heartbeat. And so this study of heart rate variability has really impacted how we think about things. And what we know is it's things like yoga, it's things like meditation that help us maintain or move towards high heart rate variability so that our vagal tone gets stronger and we're able to recover quicker. So I think that's the key point I want to drive home is we want to recover quickly. We go into fight flight 8 to 15 times a day. We don't want to stay stuck there. And that's the issue with trauma, is that if we've had a trauma, we can really get stuck. Let me go back to this. Maybe I have to go, there it is. With trauma, we can really get stuck in the red zone here or the blue zone. So if we've had a trauma in our life, we really can stay in quite a hypervigilant state, that fight flight space of irritation and frustration, anxiety and fear, or we can flip into that freeze place, which is a lot of dissociation and shutdown, sort of an emotional numbness that happens. So this is really what's happening with people who are living with trauma that's not been treated, is they're sort of stuck, which, and we're going to get to when we talk about relationship, if you're stuck in the blue or the red zone, it's impossible for you to have social engagement. It's impossible for you to be in close connection with other people, which is why sometimes there's so many challenges in relationships if there's a history of trauma. All right. So essentially, as Dr. van der Kolk would say, the trauma cycle sort of looks like this. So if we've had trauma, again, it can be developmental trauma. I think we all have some collective trauma from the pandemic. It could also be a specific event that happened. What can happen is our body gets sort of trapped in fight, flight, freeze. We stay vigilant. We stay sort of constantly scanning our environment. We stay in fear. We stay in shutdown. So we get trapped in that sort of nervous system being turned on, which then causes us to disconnect from the body. Because being in a body that's constantly vigilant is not a fun place to be. So we start to dissociate, we start to disconnect from our physical body. And then if we're not in our physical body, we're not in the present moment, we're not able to sort of track conversations, we're not able to remember things, we're not able to look into our partner's eyes and feel the love coming towards us, right? So then this disconnect from the body looks like a disconnect from life and a disconnect from relationships, which, you know, adds to depression, adds to, you know, feelings of, you know, just disdain and disconnect. So this is really sort of a very simplistic way to help us understand a not very simplistic thing, which is trauma. But the idea is that we get stuck, we disconnect from the body, and then we're really disconnected from our lives. So it's a kind of quick, easy way to describe it. And the main problem about not being in our body is we lose all these potential benefits. So when we're in the body, interoception is the scientific way to talk about it, we're present, right? So when I'm talking to my children and I'm making eye contact with them and I'm in my body, they feel it. Right? When my mind is sort of somewhere else and I'm a little dissociated or disconnected or I'm not really present, they feel that, right? We all feel it when someone's not completely with us. When we're not present, we also lose our keys and we don't remember when we're supposed to be somewhere and we miss meetings and right. So being in the body is paramount to being present for your life. And being in the body also gives you more agency, meaning you can make decisions, you can have clarity about your life, and you can regulate the emotions that are coming. And above all, you get super intuitive when you're in the body. So there's so many reasons. These are the 4 big ones why we want to be in our body. And unfortunately, trauma rips us from really being able to live consistently in our bodies. And it's again, why some of the treatment is learning to be back in a body which has many times for years or decades felt quite unsafe. So I'm going to skip those couple slides. So I just talked about trauma and how it's stored in the body. I want to talk a little bit about what trauma looks like for our mind, specifically our brain. And I'm doing this not to sort of give you dry content, but to help you see that trauma does affect the gray matter of our brain, which then affects how we show up in our life and how we're able to connect with others. Because I think that's what most people care about. Like, am I able to have a good quality of life? Am I able to have love? Am I able to be in good relationship with people? And unfortunately, trauma sometimes hijacks our capacity to have those things. And so I sort of feel like when people can understand this, their life makes more sense and they don't end up beating themselves up for why haven't I been able to do X, Y, or Z. So sort of understanding the brain impact, I think, is really key. So this little lit up red thing that this slide shows is called the amygdala. And the amygdala's central function is to sort of shut off fight flight. So when we're in fight flight, it sort of helps release or it turns on fight flight, doesn't turn it off, it turns it on. So it releases cortisol and adrenaline and helps us prepare to deal with whatever stressors in front of us. Well, the problem with trauma is that often the amygdala stays really hyperactive. It stays turned on all the time. So again, we get sort of stuck in this mode of being hypervigilant, being on. And if you're in a nervous system that can regulate itself, when the stressor passes and the amygdala doesn't have to be so on guard, serotonin comes back online. So when we're in fight flight, serotonin disappears. It drops because the amygdala, which creates serotonin, is busy dealing with the fight or flight. So if your amygdala is constantly turned on because of trauma, you're not making as much serotonin, which is that feel-good chemical. This is also why trauma patients are often given SSRI, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like Prozac is one of them, as a way to help them with this sort of imbalance in their serotonin system. So the other area of the brain, there's about 3 areas of the brain that are really impacted by trauma. This one's called Broca's area, and this is the one that really governs speech and our capacity to express ourselves. So what I find really interesting about this one, and it was Dr. van der Kolk who really made this clear in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. What happens with a trauma is that this part of the brain literally sort of gets cut off. So it's almost like it loses function. And so people, and you'll often hear this, we talk to people who have extreme trauma, it's like they lose their words, or, they're being accosted by someone and they can't speak up, they can't yell, they can't scream. It's this area of the brain sort of goes offline. So then you go back to my experience as an early graduate student coming out, my early years as a psychologist, and we're trained to talk to people about their traumas. But what you'll find is that when you try to ask people about their traumas, often people don't have words to describe it, right? So people can't really put to words what happened. So asking people to let's figure out the trauma and what happened, people don't know what to say about it because Broca's area was offline when the trauma happened. So Dr. van der Kolk in his books talks about how what happens is people who have had trauma often create like a cover story, right? So they had a traumatic childhood or they had a traumatic event and they feel like they should be able to talk about it, but they just can't. They can't find the words. And people are encouraging them to speak about it and they can't do it. So they create sort of this cover story about what happened. So I think it's really helpful to understand that maybe talking about the trauma might not even be possible for people, which again is why sort of somatic work, working in the body, can be a far more effective way to actually process trauma. And then last but not least, there's this beautiful little bridge called the corpus callosum in the brain that links our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is our logical, analytical side, and the right hemisphere is sort of that intuitive, artistic, emotional side. And so we want a bridge. And if you were in Tender, I talked about how women have a stronger corpus callosum than men do. So women seem to have deeper access between their left and right hemispheres. What we know about trauma is that if you've had trauma, the bridge, the corpus callosum, is smaller, right? So the more trauma there is, the smaller the connection or the fewer connections there are between the left and the right hemispheres. And we want connection between these two parts of the brain. We want to be able to use both our linear analytical side and our intuitive side. Now, the good news about this is there's some beautiful studies. This is one of them, that things like meditation and yoga actually strengthen the corpus callosum so that you do start to have way more connection between your left and your right hemispheres. So all good news that if you're, as we're talking today, or you might have come into this call already knowing I have a big history of trauma, know that there are a lot of things that you can do to shift your brain. Neuroplasticity is a real thing. And again, meditation is one of those. This is a pretty seminal study on it. Meditation is one of the things that really can heal trauma. Okay, so I want to talk now about, because again, this is why I think I see a lot of people in my office. And also this is just something in my own life that I've really been trying to understand, is being in relationship with people who have a history of trauma and how that impacts the interactions. So again, here's my model of this polyvagal theory, which means that, you know, when we're stressed, we go to social engagement first. If that's not available, then we flip into the red zone and then the blue zone. But someone who's traumatized might be living more in the red or the blue zone and have more challenge with engaging with others. Now, also, which is a big part of this whole capacity for us to connect, is something called attachment styles. And attachment styles basically are about how well we were able to attune with our mother in those early years, right? So how were we able to attune with our caregivers early on? And that attachment style will impact how we're able to attach with people, partners, friends, coworkers later in life. So I'm not going to go into attachment style because I'm not an expert in attachment at all. I've learned quite a bit about it, but I think it's part of this conversation today. But I'm going to take you just on a quick journey about attachment styles. And then as I'm talking about this, you might just note for yourself, I wonder what my attachment style is. And I'm going to start on the left, the secure attachment, because this is most of us. This is about 62% of the population had supportive caregivers, which means that they can connect with others. They don't live in fear of abandonment. They don't live in fear of rejection. So they tend to be more resilient. Then we have the more anxious attachment. And this is about 9%. So this is the lowest percentage. The least amount of people have this sort of anxious attachment style. And this means the caregiving was inconsistent. So sometimes the parent was quite attentive, and other times the parent was quite distant or detached. And there could be many reasons for this. But what happens is that there's anxiety that gets produced because you don't know, is my caregiver going to be fully there, or are they not going to be present? And so your attachment style means there's a little bit more anxiety. And so this sometimes looks like you can be a little more clingy or more needy or hypersensitive because, again, you're not quite sure from that early parental relationship if someone's going to be there for you. Then if we keep going around, the yellow is the fearful, the avoidant attachment. This is about 15% of the population. And this is, they had a childhood where there was neglect or there was rejection from caregivers. And again, There could be many reasons for this. Your parent might have had postpartum depression, and so they weren't able to really connect with you in a deep way. Or you might have had a parent that, had to leave for work or was in the military and was gone for long periods of time, right? So we have to consider there's many reasons, but the caregiver wasn't very present for the child. So they end up having sort of a lot of fear. But how it shows up is sometimes ambivalence, like almost like I'm fine on my own. I'm okay. I don't need people in my life. I prefer being independent, and can even go to an extreme. And then the blue one, this is about 15% of the population. This is called a dismissive avoidant, or sometimes a disorganized is another word that sort of describes it, attachment. And this was a situation early on where there's a lot of chaos and neglect. Caregivers created a lot of pain for the child. And so as adults, they can be afraid to be alone, but they're also afraid to have intimacy and closeness. So they kind of can go back and forth, between not wanting to trust someone, but then being completely close to someone to avoid not having anyone. So it's sort of it can be a little bit more of a chaotic going back and forth. So what we know about all these different attachment styles is that, again, they start early on, but they are really related to how we relate to people, and some of the later in life. And some of the most interesting research that at least I know about is that if we have had challenging attachment as a child, then if we have trauma later in life, we are much more prone to develop something like PTSD because we didn't have that secure attachment growing up. So in addition to understanding our attachment style, the other thing that I really think impacts relationships is this concept of dissociation. And dissociation is a really common in people who've gone through a traumatic event or have had kind of that continual trauma going on while they're growing up. And dissociation is essentially when we're just disconnected. So we're mentally disconnected, we're physically disconnected from our body. And when we disconnect, when we float away, we're certainly not in the present moment. We're not able to really make eye contact or engage. We might feel quite detached from what's going on around us. We're not tracking conversations. We might feel quite numb emotionally, physically. And most people that dissociate because of trauma, they're also pretty good at covering it up because they've done it so much that they're pretty good at recovering. So even though they go away for like a period of time, they're pretty good at like people not knowing that that's happening to them. I worked with a client, again, a male client who had really, really severe trauma growing up. And he was constantly dissociating. And I didn't really pick up on it for the first couple months of working with him because he was so skilled at covering it up, right? It wasn't until we actually started to work somatically in the body that I began to watch how he would just sort of disconnect. So the powerful healing piece for this particular client was when he learned to start to get into his body. He learned that he could feel safe in his feet. He learned he could feel safe in his pelvis. And when he did that, his presence engaged, right? The light behind his eyes came on. He started to sort of shine from the inside out. And all of his relationships in life started to get better. So for him, he didn't even know he was dissociating, right? I didn't know, as a psychologist, I didn't know he was dissociating early on. And as I kept working with him, I started to pick up on it and then help him see this is what's been happening for a good portion of your life. So then he started to understand, wow, I leave a lot, right? I leave my body, I leave the situation. And so his capacity to get back in the present moment in his body completely started to change his life. He was someone who didn't have friends. He wasn't dating. Partially it was because he wasn't very present. So dissociation is a big thing. And again, once we get into the body, this can be a game changer for people who have dissociation. So let's talk now about how do we treat trauma? Like, what are some of the things that are helpful? And let me start here. These are like 4 really important things in terms of treatment that I think about. And these are written about again in that seminal book, The Body Keeps the Score. So when working with people who have trauma, who have dissociation, what we want to do is help them make associations again. We want them to be able to connect again to their body, connect to their heart, connect to their mind. And so the first big treatment goal is to help people who have trauma learn how to be more calm, learn how to relax the body, learn how to find inner focus. They've been living in a hypervigilant, sort of elevated state, potentially for a long time. And so learning that they actually have the power to relax their body is really powerful. Then once they have sort of that relaxation training in place, it's one of the first things I do with people is just train them how to relax their body and help them see that they can do this. They don't need me talking them through a long meditation. They can learn to do this on their own. Then once you've learned how to relax the body, then you have to sort of take that newfound skill of relaxation and apply it to situations that can be triggering. So apply it to times when you're having a difficult conversation, or apply it to images or thoughts that from the past that tend to sort of set you off. So we have to learn the skill of relaxation, then we have to learn to apply it to intense times. Then we have to work on being fully alive in the present. So again, the tendency for people with trauma is to disappear. This isn't your fault if this is what has happened to you, or you realize, oh my gosh, I think I dissociate all the time. This often happens. This is how our psyche protects us in the midst of that trauma, is we sort of leave the body so that we don't have to be in the terror or the horror of what's going on. But then it doesn't serve us long term, because, and this is the real key with trauma, is like the trauma has passed. It's over. It's done with. You can't change it. But your body, your nervous system, your psyche is acting as if it's still occurring in the present moment, even though it's not. It's done. It's over, right? So we have to have sort of this capacity to learn to be fully alive in the present. So this is why with people, I often work with 5 senses, right? Engaging the 5 senses, because our senses are in the present moment. Our breath is in the present moment. Our body is in the present moment. So if we can learn to be in the present moment, right? That is such a balm for people with trauma, because with trauma, again, your past is sort of where you're stuck, so to speak. And then the last piece of a treatment goal is helping clients and people with trauma no longer have to keep secrets from themselves. So it's well established in the treatment literature that people often repress traumatic events and they have no memory of it, right? This happened to me. I had a really traumatic thing happen to me at 5, and it did not surface for me until I was in my 40s. And there's some amazing research saying that this is not an uncommon thing. I'm not going to remember the exact study, but it was a study where young girls and women had been brought into the ER for sexual assault. So it was actually literally in their medical record. And then they were reached out to like 10, 15 years later. And there was a huge portion of these women who had no memory of the event, right? Even though it was in the medical record, they had no memory of that happening. So it's very, very common for people to push down traumatic events, but then for them to come back later. So especially as people start to move into sort of unraveling and working with themselves, sometimes trauma comes up. And I always tell people, for me, this was the case for me. When my trauma came up, it was the greatest gift. It was the greatest gift because I finally started to understand why I was the way that I was. And I finally understood that secret that I'd pushed down, how much it had impacted every aspect of my life. So part of the work with trauma is to help people no longer have to keep secrets from themselves, and sometimes meaning keep secrets from others, but mostly from self. So you'll see of these 4 treatment goals, most of them have to do with the body, right? Learn how to be calm, learn how to maintain that calm, learn how to be in the present moment. So what treatment for trauma looks like now, and this again is totally different than when I was a young green psychologist. We used to just work with talk therapy. Now we know for trauma, we want a really multifaceted approach to work with trauma. So we call it the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach, that both of them are important. And one of the things I love about this new literature on trauma is that we want to give lots of options, right? So if I'm working with someone with trauma, I often are referring them to other people for other treatment modalities as well. And often in my profession, that's like a no-no. We're like, you just work with one therapist. Well, what I've learned with trauma is that because this multifactorial approach is best, if I don't do EMDR, I will send my client for EMDR or for autogenic training, or I'll send them for, other treatments, other modalities, because it seems like if we can work with both a bottom up and a top down, that's most effective. So the top down, working from the head down, right? This is straight talk therapy, psychotherapy, maybe pharmacology. So using medication affects the brain. Writing can be a very sort of analytical type of treatment. And there's great research on using writing, narration, narrative therapy as healing. But again, the real piece that was left out when I was trained in all of this, but is really big now, is we've got to get into the body. So that's the bottom up approach. So that can look like dance and music and yoga and meditation and breath work and chanting and beat in the feet, beat in the pelvis. It's all of these skills and tools that I rely so much in my practice, that if we can do both of them, work with both this bottom-up approach and get people in their bodies, teach them to relax, as well as help them understand things and maybe speak it and speak truth to themselves, maybe speak truth to others, this seems to be really effective. And then of course, there's sort of a mix in EMDR and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. These sort of use both bottom up and top down. Okay. Last thing I want to say, I'm looking at my time. I can't believe an hour has already passed. There is amazing research on yoga for trauma, which is why there's so many great programs being taught now on trauma-informed yoga. This particular study, again, done by this researcher that I'm talking about this whole time, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, really shows that, he says that yoga has been far more effective than any pharmacology ever used for PTSD, right? Any pill ever created for PTSD, yoga has topped it. And he's got actually 3 studies out that have shown similar findings. So really powerful. There are things, I'm not going to go into this in detail. This would be a part of my longer training course if you're interested in all of this. There are things in yoga that could be triggering, so we need to be aware of that if you're teaching more of a trauma-informed class. But it seems like the thing that is so effective, if you remember the slide I showed you about treatment goals, that ability to stay calm, that ability to stay present, be engaged in the moment, this is all happening in yoga, right? The breath, the body, these anchor us in the moment. We learn how to ground. We're connected to other people. There's an amazing study about just breathing and moving together improves people's moods, right? So just being in a room with yoga, other people doing yoga can shift you, and you don't have to ever say one word to anyone, right? Just being in a room, moving and breathing together is powerful. So I'm going to get to some questions, but I do want to just put a little quick plug here in the end that I'm starting a course this fall, September 19 to be exact, called Reclaim. And it's about the heroine's journey. And I'm going to do a little bit more conversation about this after my yoga class on Saturday. And then I'm also going to do a full like 45-minute informational kind of webinar on it on Monday. So if you've been in Tend Her, it's going to be like you're going to get week 5 of Tend Her. Instead, we're going to talk about the heroine's journey. But the details is we're going to do 6 months. And this is based on, I'll talk about this more on Monday night, but I've been on my own heroine's journey for sure in the last 18 months. And it's kind of all come together and helping me understand why I went through what I've been going through and how I can sort of teach this to other people. So it's a 6-month journey to reclaim yourself and to really start to listen and reintegrate the different parts of yourself that have been exiled. And how this relates to trauma is when we're traumatized, we cut off big parts of ourselves, right? And so this journey is a chance to kind of bring back online all these disparate parts. So it'll be weekly meetings. You'll get yoga, 2 yoga classes a week. There's going to be opportunities to work in small groups with me and also to work one-on-one with me. And my practice is full. And so this is a chance for people to maybe get a little bit more individualized work. These are the things we're going to work through in the heroine's journey. And again, I'll give you more information about this. So let's see. I should put this in the chat box. Let me see if I can do this. I don't have my assistants. Sean, you can do this. I see that you're on. It's just the store.dryogamama is where they can find it. So we're doing an early bird deposit. There's the price of the full program. But if you join early, you're going to get some content before September 19th. So you're going to get bonus content between now and when we start in about a month. So there'll be some calls and things coming your way before that. And again, here's where the informational webinar is going to be Monday, August 8 at 7 p.m. And let me see, I think I can pull that into the chat box. Let me see if I can do this. I'm off my big computer where I had everything saved, of course. I don't even think Mercury's in retrograde right now. And then while you're doing that, while I'm doing this, if you have any questions about trauma and everything I've talked about, I'm going to get to those questions now. So I'm definitely going to go over. So feel free to jump off when you need to jump off, but I am going to take the time to answer all of those questions. Okay, and there's the Zoom link for Monday night at 7 if you want to join. Okay. By the way, thank you all for being here. I feel like I've been online a lot in these last couple of weeks. And so I appreciate that people still want to hear what I have to say. Okay, so I'm going to get into a couple of these Q&As. Margaret, this is an easy one. So yes, Margaret, I am going to do Remind this fall. So I'm going to do the heroine 6-month program. Will start September. Then Remind is just an 8-week program. So it's really sort of, I would call it my signature course, which is using yoga for mental resiliency. And that'll start in October. And then for those of you who really like a more in-depth study of psychology, yoga integration, that's called Yoga for the Mind. That starts in February. And so that's for therapists, health professionals, yoga teachers, or people who just are hungry for going deeper into this content. I do that about every 2 years. That'll start in February of 2023. And Monday will be recorded. Yes, Margaret, everything gets recorded. What if someone has experienced everything on the trauma list? Yeah. I don't quite know how to answer that, but I know it's possible. And I would say the thing that I try to consistently work with people who have pretty significant trauma is to help them understand we can't go back and change it. We can't go back and change the past, right? It happens. Whatever happened to us happened. And so staying stuck in the victim mindset of what happened doesn't help, but there is so much hope. And I would just say, like, right now, what's coming out around treatment for trauma, understanding the importance of the body, understanding breath work, humming work, understanding things like cold plunging. There's all kinds of interest in treatments right now that are helping us expand how to work with trauma. So, and I just knowing working, I can think of several of my clients now that came in with really, really severe trauma and have really good lives now, right? They were pretty not functioning quite well at all in the beginning. And have learned to be in their body, have learned to self-regulate, have learned the tools of breath, have learned when they can feel a trigger coming, and are able to manage the trauma so they can still have a really good quality of life. So I guess I want to instill hope in whoever asked that question, just helping you know that treatment is very possible, and changing the brain. This is where I get my love of neuroscience. The brain is flexible. The brain can change. So even if that corpus callosum has been damaged because we have all this trauma, it's possible to grow it, to strengthen it, right? So, we're not stuck in our histories. I think that's the important point. Just because we have a history that's been traumatic or hard, we don't have to remain stuck there. We can have a good future going forward. Maureen asked, can you talk about leaving the body and what that looks like, and how can you tell? So sort of, Maureen, as I talked about earlier, it's often hard to tell when someone is left, right? And also I would say we live in such a numbed out culture. We live in a culture where it's very rare to have people who are super present with you, who are looking into your eyes, who are really in the now with you. That is a rare gift, unfortunately. So I would say most of us are, or can be, or go into dissociation, or it's a continuum. So variations of it often. So anytime we numb out, anytime we're not really present, anytime, our mind is scattered, we can think of this as being on that continuum of dissociation. So again, I think sometimes it's hard to tell in other people. We just think that they are a bit distracted or a bit forgetful. But we can often feel in ourselves when we've left the body. We know it, right? We feel spacey. We feel forgetful. We have big swaths of time that we can't remember. Like, what did I do yesterday? So again, dissociation is a continuum. We all numb out. We all disconnect from the present moment. But someone with severe trauma is really disconnected from the present moment, really disconnected from their bodies, really disconnected from their emotions. Yeah, I guess that's what I want to say about it. It's a continuum. Hard to sometimes tell about other people, but we want to start to learn when we're disconnected. We don't feel as good when we're disconnected, that's for sure. Okay, how can we help a 15-year-old that might be going through trauma caused by her environment, distant, neglect, abusive parents, but she doesn't want or can't talk about it? In which ways can we support her as distant relatives when we've also gone through trauma ourselves? Yeah, I would say most people on this earth, as someone said to me, we do not live on an enlightened planet, right? We live on a planet that's got a lot of darkness and a lot of light, right? So I think trauma, again, is such a common thread between so many of us. So with the 15-year-old who doesn't want to, or is going through trauma, but can't talk about it, again, we know that Broca's area, it's really hard for people to talk about trauma. And so what I would do with this young woman as a relative is to get her into her body, take her on hikes, get her out in nature, get her swimming, have her take a class with you that involves being in the body. There's other skills and tools, the breath work, the rocking, this rocking action back and forth is so calming for our nervous system. Singing, humming. So if this young woman has any kind of interest in singing, There's all this beautiful research about singing, and humming stimulates the vagal nerve and is really calming for the nervous system. And then when you sing in groups, the power of that increases. So I think there are ways of drama. There's, in fact, in The Body Keeps the Score, he's got a great chapter on drama, like drama therapy. So I think sometimes, I know I've tried to talk to my children about some hard things that are going on for them, and they can't find words. And as a psychologist, I have struggled with this. I'm like, why can't I get my kids to talk? Why can't I get them to talk to me? I got to send them to someone else. And yes, they should be with other people besides their mother psychologist. But I also understand that sometimes developmentally, kids don't have the words. They can't have a conversation about what they're feeling in the same way that an adult can. And so again, that work in being in the body and working things through the body is something we can all do. We don't need any professional training for that. So that would be sort of my best answer. I am having class on Saturday, 9 o'clock. It'll be online for free for those of you who want to join, and I'll be here in person as well. I do treat people with trauma. In fact, a large portion of my caseload is trauma, but I am unfortunately on a really, really long waiting list. And so when I'm doing more work in teaching courses, because I feel like I'm able to make a larger impact working with a lot of different people. But I do have a lot of great people, referral sources that I send people to. So if you want to email separately, info@heartlandyoga.com, we can send you some referral sources of people that are well-trained to deal with trauma. Okay, Sean, I'm just going to ask you, because I know you're on with me. Is there any other questions that I missed in the chat box that I should check out? Or did we get them all?
So Betsy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
So Maureen just wanted to know about the slides, where she could find the slides. That was the only other one.
Great, Maureen. We will put this video on YouTube, and then where can we put the slides? I think I can do a PDF of the slides on my website, but Maureen, I know you, so I'll send you the slides. How does that sound? I'm trying to think where a place to land the slides, but I will put them, I'll send them to you. And if anyone else wants a copy of the slides, if you email us, info@heartlandyoga.com, we'll send them to you. All right. I think we did it. Great, you guys. Thanks, Joe, for being on. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Yeah, and Shelly, I do want to make a comment. She said it's hard to find the motivation to practice mindfulness or yoga during these dissociated times, and I completely agree. We live in a dissociated culture. We live in a very split culture, and I say this all the time. If we choose to continue to be sort of in the zeitgeist of our culture, we're going to be imbalanced, and we're going to have a hard time healing. So I do think, Shelly, part of it is finding like-minded people that are also seeking to grow and to evolve. And oftentimes that means we have to go someplace where these people are, like a yoga class or a meditation class. And I think sometimes doing it online can keep us a little dissociated. So even though I love online stuff too, it also can connect us. So, but yeah, we have to find people that are also doing the work, I think. Roxanne, if you like those names for referrals, again, if you can email us, info@heartlandyoga, that would be great. Okay. Brenda, look forward to Reclaim. Me too. I'm so excited to teach this. I feel like my last 18 months have been a massive journey. And so it's going to be exciting for me to take my journey and teach it, but then also learn from you guys and be in sort of community together. I think what's part of my desire to teach Reclaim is that I've been talking to so many women through our podcast and just through my interactions, so many women on this massive shift, whether it's I'm leaving a job, I'm leaving a career, I'm leaving a relationship, I'm changing, I'm going to homeschool my kids. There's so much change that I feel like having this beautiful roadmap of one way to navigate all the shifting and doing it in community of other people is going to be really powerful. Yeah, I'm excited too. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you all soon. Okay. Thanks, Mariana.